Let's start with a simple but disturbing question. If every country in the world owes money, who are they all in debt to? America owes $35 trillion. Europe's debt is climbing past $17 trillion. Japan, over $12 trillion. Even the so-called developing nations, they're drowning too. So if everyone is in debt, who's the lender? What if the world's real creditor isn't a country or a government or even a person, but something no one votes for, no one audits, and no one truly understands? What if the debt-based economy we live in isn't broken, but built to keep us all trapped in perpetual interest payments to a global invisible bank? Because the deeper you dig, the more unsettling the truth becomes. Money isn't created by governments anymore. It is created by offshore shadow networks of private institutions that don't appear on any national balance sheet. The money you work for, the loans that define your country's survival, are all backed by promises that were never real in the first place. Stick around because by the end of this you'll see who the real creditor is, and why your taxes, your mortgage, and your future are tied to an invisible empire. But first, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments and make sure you hit subscribe, because here we expose the unfiltered truth no network dares to touch. To understand today's invisible debt machine, we have to rewind back to the Bretton Woods Conference 1944. The world had just survived the bloodiest war in history. 44 nations gathered in a quiet hotel in New Hampshire to rewrite the rules of global finance. They agreed. From now on, the US dollar would anchor the world. Every currency would peg to it, and the dollar would peg to gold, $35 an ounce. For a time, it worked beautifully. Trade boomed. Economies rebuilt. America became the banker to the planet. But beneath that golden promise, cracks began to form. As Europe and Japan recovered, they needed dollars, mountains of them, to trade, invest, and rebuild. But there was a problem. The US didn't have enough gold to back all the dollars being demanded overseas. So banks did something clever and dangerous. They started creating unofficial dollars outside the US, outside regulation, inside offshore branches in London and Zurich. They called them Eurodollars. Not European dollars, but offshore dollars. IOUs in dollar form, created by private banks, never recorded by the Federal Reserve. Sound familiar? Private institutions creating money that doesn't officially exist? It's the same trick Wall Street pulled decades later with mortgage-backed securities. By the late 1960s, more dollars were circulating outside America than inside it. Nixon looked at the numbers, panicked, and in 1971 he ended the gold standard. The dollar was now pure fiat, backed by nothing but trust. And those Eurodollars? They exploded. Banks could now lend infinite money with no gold constraint, and governments could borrow infinitely too. Sound familiar? Every solution to a crisis since 1987, 2000, 2008, 2020 has been the same formula. Print, lend, inflate, repeat. But here's where it gets darker. Because this offshore system didn't just create fake liquidity, it created a parallel financial universe that no regulator, no central bank, and no government fully controls. Sound familiar? It's the same illusion we see today in crypto exchanges, leveraged ETFs, and unregulated derivatives that claim to hedge risk but actually multiply it. From 1944 to today, the world moved from gold-backed money to trust-backed debt. And now that trust is evaporating. Because when every country is a debtor, the only creditor left is the system itself. Here's the twist nobody tells you. The real creditor isn't the IMF or China or even the US Federal Reserve. It's something older, bigger, and more shadowed. A network of megabanks that operate beyond borders, trading invisible dollars that never appear in any government ledger. They call it the Eurodollar system, but insiders use a simpler phrase, the system behind the system. It's not in New York. It's not in Washington. It's a web, connecting London, Singapore, the Cayman Islands, and hundreds of offshore booking centers where the world's liquidity hides. These banks don't need permission to create dollars. They simply type them into existence. backed by nothing but accounting entries and collateral chains so complex even regulators get lost. And when crises hit, it's these same banks that the Federal Reserve secretly bails out, using swap lines, emergency credit pipelines to foreign central banks, so the shadow system doesn't collapse. Because if it did, every government on Earth would fall overnight. You won't believe the name that appears on some of these bailout documents, and the receipt is wilder than you think. Let's break it down. A Eurodollar isn't a real US dollar. It's an offshore dollar, a promise by one bank to another. If Bank A in London deposits $1 billion at Bank B in the Cayman Islands, Bank B records a liability in dollars, but no physical dollar ever moves. This shadow money circulates through balance sheets like ghosts. Trillions of dollars worth of assets that aren't backed by anything tangible. It's the ultimate form of financial alchemy. In 1980, the Eurodollar market was estimated at $1 trillion. By 2000, it was $30 trillion. Today, estimates range from $200 to $300 trillion. No one knows for sure, because it's off the books. To put that in perspective, that's more than 3 times global GDP. A mountain of promises built on invisible money. Here's the illusion. Governments think they borrow from investors. In truth, they borrow from this shadow liquidity pool. When the U.S. Treasury issues bonds, offshore banks buy them using Eurodollars, not real cash, which are themselves created from other debts. Debt backed by debt. Backed by nothing. Every time a government runs a deficit, these shadow banks expand the money supply. Quietly, invisibly. This system owns governments, because if it collapses, national currencies implode too. Remember 2008? Lehman Brothers wasn't just an American crisis. It was the Eurodollar system seizing up. Trillions in synthetic dollars vanished overnight. Liquidity swaps, emergency lifelines, had to be opened between the Fed, the ECB, the Bank of Japan, and the Bank of England. In 1 month, $580 billion was funneled offshore, quietly, to keep the shadow system alive. In 2020, during the pandemic panic, that number hit $10 trillion in swap lines. $10 trillion. Created overnight, not for citizens but for the same banks that created the problem. They call it stabilization. But it's really life support for a synthetic empire. Because here's the truth. The Eurodollar system is the real-world reserve currency. The Federal Reserve may print dollars, but the shadow banking network creates most of them. And because no one votes for this system, no one can stop it. Central banks pretend to be in control, but they're hostages. If they raise rates too far, shadow money evaporates. If they lower them too much, inflation explodes. Either way, we pay. Think of it like a pyramid. At the top, a handful of megabanks. JP Morgan, Citi, HSBC, Barclays, Deutsche Bank. The architects of the Eurodollar web. Beneath them, sovereign debt markets, corporate bonds, derivatives, mortgage securities. At the base, you, the taxpayer, paying interest on a debt born in an offshore spreadsheet. It's parasitic finance, feeding on the productive economy while creating nothing real. They engineer booms and busts on demand. In 1998, the LTCM collapse, saved by Wall Street. In 2008, the subprime crisis, saved by the Fed. In 2020, the pandemic panic, saved by swap lines. Every time, the same cycle: bailout, inflation, debt. And every bailout cements their power. Here's one number that should haunt you. Between 2008 and 2023, global debt rose from $142 trillion to over $315 trillion. That's a 120% increase in just 15 years. And yet, no one can explain who the world owes, because the creditor is a mirage, a ledger entry in the cloud of offshore finance. This is why inflation keeps rising even when the economy slows, why stock markets soar while real wages stagnate, why governments can't pay down their debt, because the debt isn't just owed, it's manufactured. Every dollar you hold is someone else's liability, but the source of that liability, the shadow dollar, is nowhere to be found. This is what economists call the moral hazard of synthetic liquidity. But let's call it what it really is. Financial colonization. Your savings, your pension, your currency, all depend on the goodwill of a system no one controls. A system that profits from crises. A system that grows stronger every time the world panics. They don't need guns or armies. Their weapon is the spreadsheet. Their battlefield is your balance sheet. And their empire? It's built on the one thing the modern world can't function without: debt. Here's the punchline of the 21st century. The world doesn't owe money to any nation. It owes it to an invisible empire of leverage. The real creditor isn't China, or the US, or the IMF. It's the global dollar system, a machine that creates debt faster than economies can grow. And the bigger it gets, the more fragile it becomes. Because every solution, every stimulus, every bailout, feeds the same monster that caused the crisis. We're now in the endgame of a century-long experiment. For the first time in history, every major country runs a deficit simultaneously. Every currency is fiat. Every government depends on rolling debt. And the true supply of dollars? Unknown, unregulated, untouchable. When this system breaks, and it will, there's no reset button, no back to gold, no central bank fix. Because the real money isn't printed anymore, it's promised. And promises eventually break. So next time you hear that the debt doesn't matter, remember, that's exactly what they want you to believe. Because denial is the glue holding the illusion together. If every country is in debt, then maybe we're not living in a world of nations anymore. Maybe we're living in a financial simulation, where debt is the product and trust is the collateral. So, are we wiser now? Or just walking the same path in better suits? If this opened your eyes, hit like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more deep dives into the truths they don't teach in school. Because understanding the system is the first step to breaking free from it.